In 1968, when Harlem was still a battleground between the oppressed and the powerful, Big Frank Dawson, leader of the notorious white supremacist gang, made a decision that would seal his fate. He thought his street power, his connections, and his ability to instill fear in Harlem's people made him untouchable. He had no idea that his actions would bring him face to face with the legend of Harlem himself, the man whose name was synonymous with respect. This is the story of what happened when Big Frank Dawson dared to attack Bumpy Johnson's son, and how 48 hours later the streets of Harlem would echo with a lesson of justice delivered by the hands of a father. Big Frank Dawson had long ruled the streets of Harlem through fear, controlling a gang of racists that thrived on violence and intimidation. He ran his operations with a deep hatred for people of color, targeting black businesses and families, spreading terror to keep Harlem's residents under his thumb. Dawson's arrogance was legendary. He believed he was above the law and that no one, especially not a man like Bumpy Johnson, could touch him. To Dawson, Bumpy Johnson was nothing more than a relic of the past, an old player who no longer mattered. But Dawson had no idea that Bumpy's legacy was built on respect, honor, and a code that transcended any attempt to intimidate or silence it. Bumpy wasn't just a leader of Harlem, he was Harlem's protector, a man who would do anything to safeguard the future of his people, especially his family. When Dawson's gang targeted Marcus Johnson, Bumpy's son, in an attempt to send a message to Bumpy, they unknowingly challenged the very foundation of Harlem's underworld. Marcus, though young, had inherited his father's strength and resolve. Dawson's mistake was thinking that his gang's violence could break the Johnson family, but no one ever broke the Johnsons, not with their street wisdom, their loyalty, and their drive for justice. When the racist gang leaders attacked Marcus Johnson, it wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a declaration of war. Dawson's group of men assaulted Marcus outside a local diner, believing the young man was weak and powerless. They didn't realize that Marcus was the son of Bumpy Johnson, and they had just made the gravest mistake of their lives. For Bumpy, the attack wasn't just an assault on his son. It was a personal affront to everything he stood for. His family, his legacy, and the very streets that had given him power were under threat. Dawson, with his gang of violent racists, had crossed a line that would never be forgiven. This was no longer about a father protecting his son. This was about sending a message that no one, not even the most powerful gang leader, could operate above the code of respect and justice that governed Harlem. What Dawson didn't know was that Bumpy had already seen through his act. He had eyes everywhere. His connections stretched far and wide, and when word of the attack reached him, Bumpy's face hardened with quiet rage. But he didn't act immediately. He was calculated. He understood the game, and now he would turn it against the men who thought they could destroy him. The trap was set, and Dawson's fate was sealed in the very moment he crossed the line. It started when Marcus Johnson, Bumpy's son, walked out of the diner, unaware that the storm was waiting for him just outside. He had been talking to a few friends, laughing about something trivial, when suddenly, without warning, Big Frank Dawson and his gang ambushed him. They attacked in broad daylight, trying to humiliate him in front of the people who respected his father. Marcus was quick on his feet, his instincts sharp like his father's, but the gang outnumbered him. They threw him to the ground, kicking him with brutal force. As they laughed, spitting out racial slurs, they made sure the message was loud and clear. This is what happens when you stand against us. But what they didn't know was Marcus's connection, and that was where their arrogance would cost them everything. A young man named Eddie, who had been working with Bumpy's crew for years, saw the attack unfold from across the street. He didn't hesitate. He ran to Marcus's aid, but before he could intervene, he caught sight of Bumpy, watching from a nearby corner, his face hidden in the shadows. Bumpy wasn't running to Marcus's rescue like a maniac. No, he was watching waiting. And when the moment was right, he would strike. But for now, he let the gang's pride lead them down a path they wouldn't be able to turn back from. Marcus, beaten but never broken, managed to escape the gang's grip. He stumbled into Eddie's arms, bloodied but alive, his pride more damaged than his body. That night, Bumpy didn't say much, but his eyes told a different story, a promise that the time for justice was coming, and that the men who dared to touch his family would regret it. As the word of the attack spread, Bumpy sat in his office, slowly lighting a cigar. The smoke swirled around him like a storm, much like the thoughts that churned in his mind. He sat there in silence for a while, taking in the full weight of what had happened. His son had been attacked by men who thought they could break him. But Bumpy was no fool. He knew Dawson's men were trying to break his family to prove a point. But Bumpy also knew one thing that Dawson and his gang didn't understand. No one threatens the Johnson family and gets away with it. Bumpy's voice was calm but firm when he spoke to Eddie, who stood nervously in the doorway. "This ain't just about Marcus," he said. "This is about sending a message. They think they can make an example out of my son, but they're about to see what happens when you mess with Harlem's own." His eyes narrowed, the intensity in them enough to freeze anyone who dared challenge him. "Tell them, Eddie. Let Dawson know that he has 48 hours to fix what he's done, or the next lesson is going to be for him. And it won't just be about what happened to Marcus. It'll be about respect." The tension in the room grew thick. Bumpy was a man who operated on principles, and in that moment, it was clear Dawson had broken one of the most sacred laws of Harlem. And now, he would face the consequences. As the clock ticked down, Big Frank Dawson and his gang were basking in their false sense of security. They believed that the attack on Marcus would send a message not only to Bumpy, but to everyone who thought they could defy their rule. They believed Harlem would cower, that the Johnson family's reign was slipping. Dawson, ever the arrogant leader, started making plans to expand his territory, assuming that Bumpy would be too distracted to retaliate. He made deals with even more dangerous men, thinking that he had control over the streets of Harlem. But Bumpy wasn't distracted. He was moving in silence, organizing his response with the precision of a seasoned strategist. While Dawson plotted his next moves, Bumpy was gathering his allies, local business owners, community leaders, and loyal men from his crew who had fought beside him for years. Bumpy knew that this wasn't just about muscle, it was about sending a message that no one, especially men like Dawson, could ignore. The gang's confidence only grew with each passing hour, unaware that they were walking straight into Bumpy's trap. Bumpy's plan was simple but ruthless. He would make sure that Dawson's gang would be publicly humiliated in front of everyone, stripped of their power and their pride. He knew the streets would never forget how Dawson's men attacked Marcus, and he knew that retribution would not only restore respect, but also remind the people of Harlem who truly held the power. It wasn't just a matter of showing force, it was about showing who had the moral high ground. Dawson's gang had used violence and fear, but Bumpy would use honor and justice to bring them to their knees. Everything was set in motion. The trap was laid. The countdown had begun. It was 48 hours later, on a warm summer evening in Harlem, when Big Frank Dawson and his gang arrived at the corner of 145th Street, the spot where they believed they would meet with their allies to discuss new business ventures. Dawson, confident as ever, strutted in front of his men, his swagger unmatched. He had no idea that he was walking straight into Bumpy's carefully planned retribution. The street was alive with the usual hustle of Harlem, but there was an eerie tension in the air. Dawson's gang, unaware of the storm about to hit them, walked right into the middle of a trap. As Dawson stepped up to greet his men, he turned, only to be met with the calm, calculating presence of Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy, flanked by his crew, stood a few feet away, his face impassive. He wasn't the man to rush into things, especially not when it came to something as personal as family. He understood that timing was everything. The exact moment of confrontation had arrived. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Dawson, still grinning in his arrogant belief that nothing could touch him, took a step forward, his chest puffed out. "Do you know who I am?" he sneered. "I run this town, Johnson. You're nothing but a ghost of the past." Bumpy didn't flinch. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of years of experience. "You made a mistake, Frank," he said, each word deliberate. "You thought you could take my son and get away with it, but you don't get to cross the line like that. Not here, not in my streets." For the first time, Dawson's smug grin faltered. He didn't understand. He thought his power, his connections, would shield him from any consequences. He thought he could act without retribution, but Bumpy's eyes, cold, unwavering, were a reminder that the streets of Harlem answered to a different code. In that moment, Dawson realized his doom was sealed. There was no escape. Bumpy's crew closed in, and the first sign of what was about to unfold came when Teddy, one of Bumpy's most trusted men, stepped forward with a stack of photographs, evidence Dawson had been involved in a slew of illegal deals that spanned from extortion to bribery to murder. "What are these?" Dawson sneered, though he already knew the answer. "These," Bumpy said calmly, "are the documents that will make sure you'll never wear that badge again. These are the same things that will bring your empire to the ground." Before Dawson could react, Bumpy spoke again. "You wanted to make an example of my son? Now you're going to see what happens when you mess with family." The silent stare between Bumpy and Dawson lasted for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't a battle of strength or even of words. It was a battle of honor. And Dawson had lost. In the next moments, Bumpy's men surrounded the gang. With quiet precision, they handed Dawson the consequences of his actions. His gang was stripped of their weapons and humiliated in front of the very people they had terrorized. Each member of Dawson's gang was forced to kneel and publicly apologize to the people of Harlem, an act that would destroy their credibility in an instant. But that wasn't enough. Dawson, the man who had thought he was untouchable, was forced to walk through the streets of Harlem, not as the feared leader of a gang, but as a humiliated shell of the man he once was. His pride was shattered, and his reputation, what little of it was left, was gone. Justice, in Bumpy's world, wasn't about violence for the sake of violence. It was about restoring balance, sending a clear message that when you cross the line, there are always consequences. Bumpy knew that for the people of Harlem to respect him, he had to show them that no one was above the code of justice, not even a racist gang leader. As Dawson's career crumbled, so too did his empire. The developers and corrupt politicians who once backed him quickly abandoned him, leaving him alone in the streets he had once ruled. The gang members who had followed him now saw him for what he truly was, a man who relied on fear and violence, not respect or loyalty. Bumpy stood tall, watching as the men who had attacked his son were reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. There would be no retaliation for retaliation's sake. Instead, Bumpy had delivered a lesson. No one messes with his family, and no one messes with Harlem without paying the price. The people of Harlem saw what had happened, and a new kind of respect grew in their hearts for Bumpy Johnson. He wasn't just the man who ran the streets. He was the man who stood for justice and honor. As for Dawson, he became a shadow of the man he once was. He never returned to Harlem, and rumors of his miserable existence spread through the streets like wildfire. The gang he once led fell apart, disbanded by Bumpy's precise and calculated actions. Dawson's life was a far cry from the fear and control he had once wielded. In the wake of it all, Bumpy's legend only grew. He had protected his family, his community, and his code, and in doing so, he solidified his place in Harlem's history. No one would forget the day Bumpy Johnson showed the world that respect was more powerful than fear. What would you do if someone threatened your family, your legacy, your home? Would you cower in fear, or would you rise like Bumpy Johnson did, protecting everything you hold dear with unwavering strength? If this story resonated with you, smash that subscribe button. We're telling the stories that history forgot, the moments that made Bumpy Johnson a legend, and the code that made him untouchable. Drop a like if you think Bumpy was the smartest man in Harlem. And in the comments, what would you have done if you were Big Frank Dawson? More legendary stories are coming soon. Don't miss it.